I was already late. The kind of late where your heart is pounding before you've even started running, where every second feels like it's being subtracted from something you can't afford to lose. My flight was boarding in 40 minutes, the terminal was on the other side of the airport, and I was dragging a carry-on that kept catching on every crack in the floor like it was personally offended by my urgency. I had my laptop bag on one shoulder, my coffee in one hand, my phone in the other, and somewhere in the chaos of trying to do all of that at once while weaving through the slow walking, widespread families who apparently had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there, my wallet slipped out of my jacket pocket. I didn't hear it fall. I didn't feel it go. I just kept running. I didn't realize it was gone until I reached the gate, breathless, red-faced, jacket half off, and patted my pocket out of pure habit. Nothing. The hollow slap of fabric against my palm was somehow worse than a punch. Everything was in that wallet. My ID, my credit cards, the folded 20 I always kept for emergencies, and the boarding pass I hadn't thought to put anywhere else because I was running late, remember, and rational thinking had already left the building. I stood at that gate and felt my entire plan for the next 72 hours dissolve in real time. My name is Cara Whitfield. I'm 31 years old, a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company, which means I spend my entire professional life making sure things go exactly where they're supposed to go, exactly when they're supposed to get there. I am, by every definition, a person who does not lose things. Except apparently I do. Except apparently on the one morning when my sister needed me at her side for a medical procedure 2 states away, I lost the one thing that would get me on that plane. I told the gate agent. She was kind about it, genuinely kind, the kind of kind that makes you feel worse because it means the situation is actually as bad as you think. She said she'd hold the flight for 5 minutes, but that without a valid ID, there was nothing she could do. 5 minutes. I turned around and started walking back the way I came, which is a generous word for what I was doing. It was closer to a controlled collapse in the direction of where I last remembered having it. And that's when I saw her. She was standing near the center of the terminal, maybe 60 years old, maybe older, wearing a long skirt and a cardigan that looked like it had been washed 100 times and was better for it. She had silver hair pulled back loosely and the kind of stillness about her that made her look out of place in an airport full of people in motion. She was holding my wallet, not looking around frantically for its owner, not standing near a help desk, just standing there, holding it, like she had been waiting for me to come back. She held it out before I even reached her. "Here," she said. I saw it fall. I almost walked past her to grab it and run, because I had 4 minutes now, maybe 3, and my sister was waiting, and I couldn't think past the logistics of the next 60 seconds. But something about the way she looked at me made me stop. Not for long. Just long enough. She pressed the wallet into my hand, and then she said, quietly, like she was finishing a thought she'd been having for a while, "You're running so fast you almost missed the thing that was trying to find you." I didn't have time to process that. I said thank you, I meant it with everything I had, and I ran. I made the flight by the skin of my teeth, collapsed into my seat while people around me were already settled with their headphones in and their shoes off, and sat there for a full 10 minutes just breathing. When I finally opened my wallet to make sure everything was there, it was. Every card, my ID, the emergency 20, and tucked behind it, folded once, a small piece of paper I didn't recognize. I pulled it out carefully, the way you handle something that feels like it matters before you even know why. It was a note, handwritten in ink that had clearly come from a real pen, not a ballpoint, something with weight to it. It said, "The person you're rushing toward needs you present, not just there. Slow down enough to arrive." I sat with that sentence for 3 hours and 40 minutes. The entire flight. I kept unfolding it and reading it again like the words might change, or like I might finally understand what she meant by it well enough to stop feeling like she had seen something in me that I had been avoiding looking at myself. Because here's the thing. I was rushing to get to my sister, yes. But if I'm being honest, which I try to be even when it's uncomfortable, I had been rushing for years. Not toward things. Just away from stillness. Away from the version of my life that would exist if I stopped moving long enough to look at it clearly. I had a job that paid well and asked everything of me. I had an apartment I rarely spent time in. I had friends I texted instead of calling and a relationship I'd walked away from 8 months earlier because he'd said, "You're always somewhere else even when you're here," and I'd told myself he was being dramatic. I had a sister who had been trying to talk to me about something serious for 3 months, and I had rescheduled that conversation 4 times because I was busy. I was always busy. I was so committed to the logistics of my life that I had stopped actually living it. And a stranger in a cardigan had seen all of that in the 10 seconds it took me to grab my wallet and run. When we landed, I turned my phone back on and had 11 messages. 9 from my sister's husband giving me updates. 1 from my mother asking if I'd landed. And 1 from a number I didn't recognize, sent at 6:47 that morning, before my flight, before the wallet, before any of it. It was a single line. It said, "Call me when you're ready to talk." The name saved to that number was Daniel. The name alone did something to my chest that I hadn't expected, like pressing on a bruise you forgot was there. We had dated for 2 years and 3 months. We had talked about moving in together, about what we wanted our lives to look like in 10 years, about the kind of people we were trying to become. And then one evening in October, 8 months before this moment, he had sat across from me at the kitchen table in my apartment and said the thing that ended us. He said, "Kara, I feel like I'm in a relationship with your calendar." And I had laughed because that's what I do when something lands too close to the truth. I laugh and I redirect and I keep moving. He didn't laugh back. He just looked at me with this expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not sadness exactly, something quieter than both of those. He looked tired of waiting for me to show up to my own life. I told him he was being unfair. I told him I had responsibilities, that the company was going through a transition, that once things settled, I would have more time. He nodded slowly and said, "You've been saying that for 14 months. And I had no answer for that because he was right and we both knew it, and the silence that followed was the kind that doesn't recover. He left that night, not dramatically. He just gathered a few things, said he loved me, said he hoped I found what I was looking for, and walked out. I had cried for exactly 1 evening and then gone back to work the next morning because there was always something that needed doing, and grief, real grief, requires a kind of stillness I didn't know how to give myself. But now his name was on my phone screen and I was sitting in a terminal in a city that wasn't mine, holding a handwritten note from a woman I would never see again. And something inside me had shifted just enough that I didn't immediately put my phone back in my pocket. I called him back. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been holding his phone. His voice was the same. That was the thing that got me. After 8 months of nothing, his voice was exactly the same, careful and warm, like he was always slightly afraid of startling something. He said, "I heard about Maya." "I'm sorry." I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Your mother called me," which meant my mother had been holding his number in her phone for 8 months and had called him during a crisis, which meant she had never really accepted that we were over, which meant I was the last person to understand the impact of what I had walked away from. We talked for 22 minutes, not about getting back together, not about the past, just about Maya, about what the procedure involved, about how scared she had been and how she hadn't wanted to tell me until it was necessary because she knew I was busy and she didn't want to be a burden. And that last part hit me somewhere I didn't have armor for. My sister, the person I was running across airports for, had almost not told me she was sick because she had learned, from years of watching me, that I didn't have room. I got to the hospital 40 minutes later. Maya was in recovery, small and pale against the white of the hospital pillow, but awake. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "You actually came." And the way she said it, surprised and grateful, like she had genuinely been uncertain, rearranged something in me permanently. I sat beside her bed for 6 hours. I didn't check my email. I didn't respond to the 3 work messages that came in during that time. I just sat there and held her hand and let her talk and listened in the way I hadn't listened to anyone in years, fully, without mentally drafting my response while they were still speaking. At some point, she fell asleep and I stepped into the hallway and stood there for a long moment just breathing. Then I took out the note and read it again. "The person you're rushing toward needs you present, not just there. slowed down enough to arrive. I thought about the woman who wrote it. I thought about the fact that she had picked up a stranger's wallet in a crowded airport, waited for its owner to come back instead of turning it in to lost and found, and then handed it over with a sentence that had more truth in it than most conversations I'd had in the last 2 years. I thought about how easy it would have been for her to just leave it. How easy it would have been for me to grab it and run without stopping. How the entire architecture of what happened next had balanced on 10 seconds of accidental stillness. That night I sat in the hospital waiting room with a cup of bad coffee, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made a list. Not a to-do list. Not a project timeline. Just a list of things I had let slip away while I was busy being efficient. Daniel's name was on it. My sister's voice the last 3 times I had called her, rushed and distracted, half present. A friend's wedding I had attended but not really been at. My own apartment, which I had decorated 2 years ago and hadn't changed a single thing in since, because I was never there long enough to notice what I wanted. The version of myself I had been before I decided that productivity was the same thing as purpose. I flew home 4 days later. Maya was recovering well, better than expected, and she made me promise to come back in 6 weeks, not for a crisis, but just because. I said yes before she finished the sentence. On the way to the airport, I passed the spot in the terminal where the woman had been standing. She wasn't there. I hadn't expected her to be, but I stopped there for a moment anyway, in the middle of all that noise and movement, and I stood still. Just for a moment. Just long enough to arrive. 3 weeks after that I called Daniel back. Not to rewind. Not to pretend the last 8 months hadn't happened. But to tell him that he had been right, that I had heard him even when I'd acted like I hadn't, and that I was sorry it had taken me this long to say it out loud. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I know." We talked for an hour. I don't know what comes next, and I'm trying to be honest with myself about the fact that I don't need to know yet. What I know is this. I lost my wallet in an airport while running for a flight I almost didn't deserve to catch. A stranger picked it up and gave it back with a note that cost her nothing and changed me completely. And somewhere in that exchange, in that 10-second window of stillness, I almost didn't allow myself. I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Not my wallet. Not even Daniel. Myself. Welcome back to Revenge Chronicles. Sometimes the greatest revenge against the life that's been pulling you under is simply deciding to finally, fully show up to your own.